Hi everyone, welcome to 2011 Studies. My name is Marty Catuzzo. I wanted to post today a study that I'm doing currently, and this is going to be an ongoing study because I think it's very relevant to what's going on and what will happen prior to Judgment Day when Christ returns. This is not really having anything to do with the 377 days of the flood. That's a separate study. But I wanted to present this first because I still believe the year 2011 was an important year. The year 2012 is an important year. However, there's some things that I'm looking at right now that I just want to make sure that there is not anything else mentioned in the Bible that would allow for a further extension of time. And as I'm saying this, I don't want it to be a discouragement to anybody. But we have to be fair, and we have to look at everything in which the Bible is declaring at this point. And I realize some of this stuff takes a lot of study. It takes a lot of work to work through. But it's a type of thing where if you see something in the Bible and you believe it relates to today, then it should be discussed. And this is one of those things. The title of this study is Within 3 Years, the Years of a Hireling. The first use of a hireling or hired hand is found in Job in the Bible. It's Job 7:1. Is there not an appointed time to man upon earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hireling? In the Bible, the years of a hireling is defined as 3 years. And I did some research and checked it out, and it's very true that 3 years is the time spans of a hired hand. Now, if it was doubled, then it would be 6 years, and there's some verses to show this. This time clue mentioned of the 3 years is found in the book of Isaiah. This time clue may have something to do with the glory of the fallen houses of worship becoming diminished and actually failing. The word contemned is used, and that's sort of a based, similar word. The things I don't know at this time regarding these verses is when it mentions within 3 years the glory of Moab will fail. I am not sure when the 3 years would have begun. If it was in 2009, then it would be 2012. If it began in 2011, then we're looking a couple more years down the road. And that's one of those things where you see a verse in the Bible and you say, okay, well, it's important. We know it's an important time clue, but yet we don't know the beginning of it. And that's going to require some serious study to try to pinpoint when the 3 years would have begun. If it has already. So, in order to establish this, we have to look at Moab and see how Moab's pride and arrogancy is related to the fallen houses of worship in which Satan has invaded. And that's a lot to do with his characteristics and his traits. Okay, Moab was the son of Lot. And Lot is the one who fled to Zoar before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is interesting too, because Zoar is mentioned in some of these verses we're studying. So he's a son of Lot, and in Numbers 22 and 23, there's an interesting exchange between the king of Moab, Balak, whose name means waster. And in short, Balak wanted Bilam to curse Israel. Balaam was under the guidance of the Lord, instructing him what to do. And we see these dramatic illustrations in Numbers, how the Lord intervened so that Balaam could not proceed further as the angel of the Lord caused his ride, the donkey, to see the angel of the Lord. And I want to discuss some of these verses because this interchange between Balak and Balaam shows that within Moab there was false worship going on, and Balak actually showed Balaam this false worship, the high places. So Numbers 22 accounts how Israel, coming out of the land of Egypt, caused the king of Moab and Moab itself to fear the multitudes which pitched on the borders of their land. Actually, I think not on the borders. It was actually they actually saw them within their land, I believe. I have to go back and look at that. But anyway, Balak the waster, king of Moab, inquired of Balaam to curse Israel, thinking that whomever he cursed would be cursed, and whomever he blessed would be blessed. Now God was giving Balaam strict order of where to go and what to say. This frustrated the king of Moab, who awaited Balaam to curse Israel. I think he tried 3 times to get him to curse Israel as they came out of Egypt. And by the way, this coming out of Egypt has a lot to do with coming out of the fallen houses of worship, as the lying signs and wonders are going on there. God equates that to, in Revelation 2, Sodom and Egypt. And as the Israelites came out of Egypt, and this whole account here is that the king of Moab feared the Israelites as they came out of Egypt, and they saw the multitudes of them. Let's see, this is how the glory of Moab, failing within 3 years, can be shown to represent the current fallen houses of worship. Now, I realize fully that this requires study, and for me to say that Moab relates to the fallen houses of worship is a huge statement, but you have to study this stuff in order to come to this conclusion. It's not something you can just read in the Old Testament and say, well, okay, that's historical. That has nothing to do with today. But it does. It does, because God uses the phrase in the latter days. And he uses this phrase a couple times, as I'll point out in this study. So God returning the captivity in the latter days has everything to do with today. And it's not talking about a certain race of people. God is no respecter of persons. He can save people from any race, and he does. But what it is, he's using an historical account of those who fell into false worship. And he's showing what would happen at the end to the houses of God. As Satan takes his seat in the temple, as we're warned, that must happen in 2 Thessalonians prior to Christ's return. That is, the falling away has to take place first before Christ's return. And we have seen the activity of that. This is Numbers 22, 1. I'm going to read Numbers 22 down to verse 7. And the children of Israel set forth and pitched in the plains of Moab on the side Jordan by Jericho, on this side of Jordan by Jericho. Oh, they were in the plains of Moab. Okay, I was wondering about that. And Balak the son of Zippor saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was sore afraid of the people because there were many, and Moab was distressed because of the children of Israel. And Moab said unto the elders of Midian, Now shall this company lick up all that are round about us, as the ox licketh up the grass of the field. And Balak the son of Zippor was king of the Moabites at that time. He sent messengers therefore unto Balaam the son of Beor to Pethor, which is by the river of the land of the children of his people, to call him, saying, Behold, there is a people come out from Egypt. Behold, they cover the face of the earth, and they abide over against me. Come now, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people. Now he's sending messengers to Balaam, trying to get him to curse Israel. Curse me this people, for they are too mighty for me. Peradventure I shall prevail, that we may smite them, and that I may drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom thou bless is blessed, and he whom thou cursed is cursed. Now he's saying this to Balaam, knowing that he carries the blessing of God one way or the other, or the cursing of God. The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the rewards of divination in their hands, and they came unto Balaam and spake unto him the words of Balak. Okay, so he sent messengers to get Balaam to come and curse Israel. In Numbers 22, God gives us precise instruction that if the princes of Moab come to Balaam in the morning, now they came to him, and he said, wait, let's tarry here until I hear from the Lord. So they stayed in that camp that night, and God's instruction to Balaam was, if they come to you in the morning, then you can go with them. But I think what happened is they didn't come to him in the morning, and he saddled up his donkey and went with them anyway, and this stirred up the Lord's anger. So the princes of Moab coming to him in the morning was the command, but I don't think that happened. So I was searching everything for that. Did they actually come to him, or did he just, get on his ride and go with them? And this sets up, Balaam, the angel of the Lord, attempting to, stop Balaam as he rode on his donkey. And 3 times there was a diversion, and 3 times Balaam beat his beast of burden. In Numbers 22, this is the account. And I realize before I get into these verses, some of these verses are going to sound outlandish, they're going to sound far-fetched. But remember, God can do anything. And, giving the ability of a beast to speak is nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. Just like God prepared the great fish in Jonah's day. We saw in a previous study how the whale sharks swim with their mouth wide open, and the picture of the diver was like so small compared to that. Nothing is compared. The thing is about this, though, is that with Jonah's fish, God prepared that fish. And just like when we read these verses of God causing his animal to speak, God prepared that also. So it sounds far-fetched, but it's actually not, because God can do anything. And this is a stumbling block for some people, but there's certain spiritual aspects of this that are just absolutely incredible. This is Numbers 22:22. And God's anger was kindled because he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the way for an adversary against him. Now he was riding upon his donkey, and 2 servants were with him. And the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand. And the ass turned aside out of the way, and went into the field. And Balaam smote the donkey to turn her into the way. But the angel of the Lord stood in a path of the vineyards, a wall being on this side, and a wall being on that side. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she thrust herself into the wall, and crushed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he smote her again. And the angel of the Lord went further, and stood in a narrow place, and there was no way to turn either to the right hand or to the left. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she fell down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he smote the donkey with a staff. And the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. Here you go, the preparing of the great fish, the Lord doing this. He's opening the mouth of this beast. And she said unto Balaam, when I've read this, I was laughing, because here you have this interchange between a beast and a man, and parrots can talk. I mean, it's not that far-fetched if God does something like this. But it sort of reminded me of the Mr. Ed show. It used to be on TV. Oh, I'm Mr. Ed. But anyway, that's where my mind went with it when I was reading this. And the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said unto Balaam, what have I done unto thee, that thou hast smitten me these 3 times? And Balaam said unto the she-donkey, because thou hast mocked me, I would there were a sword in my hand, for now I would kill thee. And the donkey said unto Balaam, am I not thine donkey, upon which thou hast ridden ever since I was thine unto this day? Was I ever wont to do so unto thee? And he said, nay. There are some spiritual aspects to this. And I didn't get into that aspect of it, probably because I was, sort of amused by this whole interchange between this beast and Balaam. But I'm going to probably go back and look at the importance of some of this language. Anyway, and the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam. Now this is all God's doing. When God, appeared, the angel of the Lord appeared with his sword drawn, and the donkey was able to see this, and animals get spooked fairly easily. So that's one of the cases where here again the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, and his sword drawn in his hand, and he bowed down his head and fell flat on his face. And the angel of the Lord said unto him, Wherefore hast thou smitten thine donkey these 3 times? Behold, I went out to withstand thee, because thy way is perverse before me. And the donkey saw me, and turned from me these 3 times. Unless she had turned from me, surely now also I had slain thee, and saved her alive. And Balaam said unto the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I knew not that thou stood in the way against me. Now therefore, if it displease thee, I will get me back again. And the angel of the Lord said unto Balaam, Go with the men, but only the word that I shall speak unto thee, that thou shalt speak. So Balaam went with the princes of Balak. And Balak was the king of Moab. Now, Balak's attempt to get, in many ways, everything to get Balaam to curse Israel, because he feared the Israelites which came out of Egypt. He took him to the high places of Baal worship. Numbers 22:41. And it came to pass on the morrow that Balak took Balaam and brought him up to the high places of Baal, that hence he might see the utmost part of the people. Now, when Balaam insisted that he would not curse Israel 3 times because God was speaking to him, he had a direct contact with the Lord, and only what the Lord said would he say, and at where he would go, he would go. And he mentioned earlier that a house of silver and gold the king could not give him to change his mind. So it was one of those things where he could not be influenced by wealth or anything like that. And even though Balaam was attempting to do that, which is very much like what Satan did in tempting Christ as he took him to the pinnacle of the temple and showed him the kingdoms, So, but in Balaam's case, neither a house of silver or gold could not influence, but only the word of the Lord. That's a good lesson. The final impact on this account is found in Numbers 24, as the term latter days is mentioned, and how Amalek was first of the nations, but his latter end would be that he would perish forever. This fast forwards things to our day, the latter days. Moab's historical downfall of worshiping false gods in high places shows how the fallen houses of worship can take on the spiritual name of Moab, just like it takes on the spiritual name of Babylon, fallen Babylon in Revelation. God does this. He uses the past history, and when he says within 3 years the glory of Moab will fail, or will be contemned, abased, God, there's many passages in the Bible that he will exalt the lowly, and he will bring down the pride and the arrogancy of the wicked. Now, what's amazing about all this is God knows all of history, and he is singling out certain aspects of history, like Babylon, Amalek, who is first of the nations. We were not privileged to know this stuff if it was not within God's word. And Moab, being proud and being haughty, full of pride and lifting himself up, those are very similar traits of Satan. And the very fact that God is using within 3 years the glory of Moab will fail or be contemned, that shows us that the fallen houses of worship, who think that no harm can come to them, yet they are following after signs and lying wonders of Satan, we have to be aware that that kind of judgment is yet to come. It has not happened yet. And when I wrote the book Countdown, I was seeing this language in the Bible after much study on this, and I was seeing how this type of a judgment must occur before Christ returns. I was thinking that it was going to be within the 153 days. The reason I believed that was the fire coming down in Elijah's day, coming down from heaven, and on the 3 bands, each band of 50 had a captain, so the 51, 51, 51 is 153. I thought that that type of judgment would occur within the 153 days from May 21 to October 21. It didn't happen, and that places it maybe premature 1 year, or it's a little further down the road. And that's why I wanted to present this today, because there's something about God's Word, especially when I approached October 21, I was seeing, well, it's not happening yet. God could have given me this information ahead of time, and maybe this warning needed to go out for a while, and that could very well be. So, as I'm presenting that within 3 years, the pride of Moab will fail at this point, or be contemned. I don't know when that started at this point, and it's going to take some study to look into this, because that's a major time clue. God gives us 3 years. There's also another verse that talks about within a year, Kedar, the glory of Kedar, which has everything to do with Arabia, will fall. And I'm going to talk on that verse a little bit here. But, you have these time clues in the Bible, and we may be entering a time where God is going to be abasing those who are proud and haughty. So we have to look at this information in the light that it may not quite be over yet until God performs his reversal. And I wanted to present this today because when I was seeing this again, within 3 years the glory of Moab will be contemned, that I can't hold this back. I can't hold this information back. It has to be presented. And even though we're looking at the year 2012, I wanted to bring this up to the forefront first, because it may be that we're going to pass 2012. Again, I don't know. This language is very, it takes a lot of study. It really does. And, when this all began within 3 years, God doesn't directly say, when you see this, then within 3 years it'll happen. But there's got to be more information that's in God's Word that I just have not seen yet. So we're going to look at this as a continued study. Let's see. We need to pay attention to this, that within 3 years the glory of Moab will be contemned. This is Numbers 24:14. I'm trying to tie this in to how this relates to today. It's not something that was just historical. Even though historically it happened, but the duplication of it applies to today as Satan takes his seat in the fallen houses of worship, or it takes his seat in the quote-unquote temple, which is the houses of God. Numbers 24:14. And now, behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, I will advertise thee what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. There again, we have that tie-in to the latter days. I actually should have, well, I did quote more of it, okay. And he took up his parable and said, Balaam the son of Beor has said, and the man whose eyes are open has said, he has said, which heard the words of God, and knew the knowledge of the Most High, which saw the vision of the Almighty, falling into a trance, and having his eyes open. I shall see him, but not now. I shall behold him, but not nigh. There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and he shall smite the corners of Moab, and destroy all the children of Seth. And Edom shall be a possession. Seir also shall be a possession for his enemies. And Israel shall do valiantly. Out of Jacob shall come he that shall have dominion, and shall destroy him that remaineth of the city. Of course, that's speaking of Christ. And when he looked on Amalek, he took up his parable and said, Amalek was the first of the nations, but his latter end shall be that he perish forever. Verse 21, and he shall look on the Canaanites, and took up this parable. And he looked on the Canaanites, and took up this parable, and said, Strong is thy dwelling place. Thou puttest thy nest in a rock. Nevertheless, the Canaanites shall be wasted, until Asshur shall carry thee away. Asshur is another name for Assyria, and the captivity that they went into by the hand of God. And he took up his parable and said, Alas, who shall live when God does this? And the ship shall come from the coast of Chittim, and shall affect Asshur, and shall affect Eber, and he shall also perish forever. And Balaam rose up and went and returned to his place, and Balak also went his way. I wanted to point this out because Numbers 24 clearly presents to us verse 14, and now, behold, I go unto my people. Come therefore, and I will advertise thee what this people shall do to thy people in the latter days. So we have a time clue there. This is not just speaking historically. God is using Moab as a picture of pride and haughtiness and what's happening in the fallen houses of worship. We can develop this more, though, and this is going to be a 2 or 3 part study, by the way, because this is very intense to get into everything in one study. There's just no way. The daughters of Moab. Now, again, when we see the language of the daughters of Zion, the daughters of Babylon, the daughters, when he's using that phraseology, it's a type of thing. It's not speaking of historically when the original account happened, but it's speaking, he's using those names and carrying them over to the last days to show how their actions were similar to the actions of those within the fallen houses of worship today. The daughters of Moab, the historical reenactment of false worship. This is from Isaiah 16:1. Send ye the lamb to the ruler of the land from Selah, to the wilderness, unto the mount of the daughter of Zion. For it shall be that as a wandering bird cast out of the nest, so the daughters of Moab shall be at the fords of Arnon. Take counsel, execute judgment, make thy shadow as the night in the midst of the noonday. Hide the outcast, bewray not him that wandereth. Let mine outcast dwell with thee, Moab. Be thou a covert to them from the face of the spoiler. For the extortioner is at an end, the spoiler ceases. The oppressors are consumed out of the land, and in mercy shall the throne be established. And he shall sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David, judging, seeking judgment, and hasting righteousness. We have heard of the pride of Moab. He is very proud, even his haughtiness, and his pride, and his wrath. But his lies shall not be so. There's a terminology about the howling. Now, when I searched this word howling, it so many times relates to the destruction that comes upon the houses of God. And this is a good word to look up. The great howling, it's Yalal. I didn't write the number down. I'll have to post that on the computer. Therefore shall Moab howl for Moab. Every one shall howl, for the foundations of Kir-Hareseth shall mourn. Surely they are stricken. Again, God is using past history, using the same names. And the Moab, howling for Moab, Moab was a person who perhaps was full of pride and arrogant, but his land also is called Moab. So we have two illustrations that Moab as a person howling for Moab or the land. I think this is language of Satan howling for his desolation because of the destruction of it, and his time is up. Because we were reading earlier that the extortioner is at an end, the spoiler ceases, the oppressors are consumed out of the land. And in mercy shall the throne be established. He shall sit upon it in the truth of the tabernacle of David, judging and seeking judgment and hasting righteousness. That's Christ right there. So Christ is reversing things. So this howling that takes place. And then it says, we have heard the pride of Moab. He is very proud, even his haughtiness and his pride and his wrath. But his lies, Satan is the father of lies, shall not be so. So this great howling, therefore shall Moab howl for Moab. Every one shall howl. For the foundations of Kir Hareseth shall ye mourn. Surely they are stricken. For the fields of Heshbon languish, the vine of Sibmah, the lords of the heathen have broken down the principal plants thereof. They are come even unto Jasser. They wandered through the wilderness, and her branches are stretched out. They are gone over the sea. Therefore I will bewail with the weeping of Jasser, the vine of Sibmah. I will water thee with my tears, O Heshbon and Elal, for the shouting, for the summer fruits, and for the harvest, and for thy harvest is fallen, and gladness is taken away, and joy out of the plentiful field. And in the vineyards there shall be no singing, neither shall there be shouting. The treaders shall tread out no wine in their presses. I have made their vintage shouting to cease. Wherefore my bowels shall sound like a harp for Moab, and my inward parts for Kirharsheth. And it shall come to pass, when it is seen that Moab is weary on the high place, there you go, it's the false worship on the high place, that he shall come into his sanctuary to pray, but he shall not prevail. This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning Moab since that time. Here's the verse. But now the Lord has spoken, saying, within 3 years, as the years of a hireling, the glory of Moab shall be contemned, with all that great multitude, and the remnant shall be very small and feeble. I wanted to point out where the howling is found in the Bible, and I think these verses are very key to understanding how Moab relates to the fallen houses of worship. This is Joel 1:13. Gird yourself and lament, ye priests. Howl, ye ministers of the altar. Come, lie all night in sackcloth, ye ministers of my God. For the meat offering and the drink offering is withholden from the house of your God. Sanctify ye a fast, call a solemn assembly, gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land into the house of the Lord your God, and cry unto the Lord. Alas, for the day of the Lord is at hand. As a destruction from the Almighty shall it come. Is not the meat cut off before our eyes, yea, joy and gladness from the house of God? This is very similar language to what we're reading about Moab. So when we see this, the howling that's occurring in these above verses to Joel, and the howling that's saying, gird yourselves and lament, ye priests, howl, ye ministers of the altar. It's very similar language, and you have to do this kind of comparison to see why the howling is taking place. This is the pride of Moab. I wanted to touch on that a little bit. Jeremiah 48:29. We have heard the pride of Moab. He is exceedingly proud. His loftiness, his arrogancy, and his pride, and the haughtiness of his heart. A friend of mine had mentioned to me if I had read the book of Obadiah, And somewhere I did, but I didn't really fully study all the language in it. And I'm really grateful for that, because the mentioning of Obadiah relates so much to what's going on today. And it actually it ties very well into this study. He is exceedingly proud. Talking about Moab. Now this is Obadiah 1:12. And I'm going to read this part of Obadiah because I think it relates to what happened during the Great Tribulation period. For thou should not have looked on the day of... I'm sorry, let me start over. But thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger. Neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Remember that Christ is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and his people are termed as part of being Judah. Neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly. Again, here Moab above is saying he is exceedingly proud. Neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of his distress. In the day of distress. Now that word distress has everything to do with affliction, tribulation. Verse 13. Thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction. Excuse me. In the day of their calamity. Nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither should thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those that did escape. Neither shouldest thou have delivered up those that did remain in the day of distress. Do yourself a favor and study the day of distress and see how it relates to the time of great tribulation, which we've exited out of. For the day of the Lord is near upon all heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Here again, we have the book of Obadiah taking this language about historically this happened to the children of Judah. However, Christ is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So this, and since it affects, for the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen, it's talking about today. We're at the day of the Lord. We're approaching that very rapidly. So Obadiah is all about the language of today, and how when a brother comes against a brother, and not allowing them to pass, and all that language that we're reading here has everything to do with, I believe, how those who've come out of the fallen houses of worship and those who remain in the fallen houses of worship, there's real enmity there. There's a conflict between those who are claiming, you got to come out, God's judgment's going to come on the fallen houses of worship. And even though Satan is ruling within that the fallen houses and coming with signs and lying wonders, that working in that fire and wearying themselves in that fire, that is a judgment, but it's not the final end judgment of God, in which I believe within 3 years the glory of Moab shall be contemned. God has set a time, and that time, whenever it started, there's a countdown to that final point in which the glory shall be abased. And that's what I'm trying to bring out in this study. And when that happens, or what's the time frame of it, that I do not know yet. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen, and that as thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. That's terrible language. I mean, that's not good language at all. Let's see. I have a couple more things to cover here. Yeah, a couple pages. This is a study that I wanted to get this up as soon as possible, because like a friend who mentioned Obadiah, there might be other people out there who are studying these things alongside, and they might have some information that God has given them. And it's a good thing to Send me any information you might have if you think that you have information on the 3 years of the glory of Moab being contemned, because it's one of those things that the starting point of that is the focus of this study. When did the 3-year countdown begin? Because I think that is a prelude to the day of judgment, when the final judgment and God reverses things, as we're learning in these languages. As they have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall be drunk, and they shall swallow down. God reverses things. It's scary language, because you have the language of people coming against those who are warning of Christ's return, and yet the end result of that is the judgment from God comes upon those who participated in that. And this is not man against man at that point. It's God's judgment. And that's truly scary. When the water and bread, when God removes the water and bread, His word, the base, the contemned, come against the honorable. This is seen in language of Isaiah 3. Chapter 3. For behold, the Lord of hosts, doth take away from Jerusalem and from Judah the stay of the staff, the whole stay of the bread, and the whole stay of the water, the mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, and the prudent and the ancient, the captain of 50. That's interesting. The captain of 50. I wonder if that relates to Elijah calling fire down. And the honorable man, and the counselor, and the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator. I will give children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them. And the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, and every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the ancient, against the older, and the base contemned against the honorable. That word base is the word contemned that we see the glory, within 3 years the glory of Moab shall be contemned. So the base against the honorable. And I think actually the word base can mean light against the weighty. So that's another way of looking at that. So who is God speaking of when mentioning the glory of Moab? Well, now I mentioned this already, but when I proclaimed that in the book Countdown, when I felt it should be within the 153 days, God's long suffering was seen in what 2 Peter 3 declares, that for the sake of salvation, He is willing to be long suffering and endure with the vessels of wrath, so that the vessels of honor, God can eventually save the people He set out to save. Now this is entering into part 2, and I did not want to cover this in 2 studies. The next intro to part 2 is who is Moab, who is proud, haughty, full of pride, wrath, and lies. That is going to be the intro into part 2, and I'll do that on another day, another time. I do want to close with a psalm, as I promised, because again, we have all this language we just read, and the Psalm 83 focuses right in on the same topic. The conspiracy of God's enemies, a psalm of Asaph. Keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against the hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel shall be no more in remembrance. Now remember, in the New Testament it talks about the Israel of God representing the believers. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Jibal, and Ammon, and Amalek. Remember, it mentioned Amalek being the first of the nations, yet therein they shall perish forever. The Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. By the way, I'm going to cover Tyrus next in the next study. It's amazing how this language all ties in, and these names that God is mentioning. Asher also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot. Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera and Jabin at the brook of Kishon, which perished in Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb, and like Zeb, yea, all their princes of Zebah, and Zalmunna, and as Zalmunna, who said, now this is a key verse, let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. O my God, make them like a wheel, as a stubble before the wind, and as the fire burneth a wood. As the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever, yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth. This language of keeping not silent, a plea to God, for the sake of your name, rise up. And for those who said, let us make to ourselves the houses of God in possession. This whole thing about the last days and the end of time, as Satan seeks worship in the houses of God, and how people basically can take over the houses of worship. It might go on for a season, and Satan does have a short season to do this. But there comes a time where God reverses things. And I am seeing more and more reversals mentioned in God's Word than I've ever seen before. And every study, it seems like I'm starting and beginning. I'm seeing a reversal. It went on, and then God reverses things. And this psalm is all about that. He will, for his name's sake, issue forth judgment. I mean, it won't last forever. So that's what we're looking at now. And I do not want this to be a discouragement for anybody, because at this point I don't know what the 3 years represents when it started. I know, I'm somewhat familiar with what it represents. Judgment coming on the fallen houses of worship and their pride and arrogancy. However, when it begins, when that start time of 3 years, and we're going to look next time also at the glory of Kedar failing. So it could be that God is, and that says within 1 year. So we have a 3 year period, and then we have a 1 year period. Whether God is progressively showing how history, their glory was removed historically, and relating that to today, I would have to go back and study the history of Kedar and Arabia, and the history of a little bit more on Moab, to see actually what happened or what took place historically, if there's any secular records of this. And I don't know if there is or not. But that might be an aid in helping us understand when the countdown for the 3 years begins. And we're going to still look at the year 2012. I'm not discounting the year 2012 at all. I mean, the study on Purim, but I think as a good intro to this study, it should have began now, and that's why I'm posting it. So that further on down the road, if we were to pass the Feast of Tabernacles in 2012, we would know that possibly that 3 years began in 2011, and we have a pretty much a time clue when God will bring judgment upon the fallen houses of worship. And again, this lines up with Belshazzar and the writing on the wall, and how his kingdom came to an end, which represents the Babylonian rule, and how Satan's rule at one point is diminished as God's word, or the dew of heaven, covers the earth. And when Cyrus was introduced into the picture, the kingdom is given to the Medes and the Persians. Historically, that is very important too to the time we're living, because it all has to do with Cyrus being my shepherd, as God says, and I believe that there's a rebuilding process after the time of Great Tribulation. So we're looking at everything that the Bible is speaking about this time. Historically, we have to understand history in order to understand what's going on right now. And without it, we're lost. Without these passages from the Old Testament, we are lost in knowing what God has planned. So we have to look at this stuff carefully, and we will continue to do so. My name is Marty Catuzzo, and if you want to contact me, especially if you have information about the 3 years within your studies that you've come across, email them to me. It's 2011studies@gmail.com. Anyway, until next time, I'll present part 2, maybe a part 3 on this. Within 3 years, the glory of Moab shall be contemned. Thank you. Thanks for listening.